Dick, it is an honor to be here today to have a conversation with you. I have known you since I was actually a doc student and an intern here at AECT, and I've always looked toward you as a very special person who has such a capacity for honoring and advocating for your students. And that has been something that has stayed with me and hopefully has become part of my style as I deal with my students now. I'd like you to talk a little bit about where you've been and where you are now, and then also look to the future. But I'd like to talk about, I know you recently retired, and talk about that transition, but what got you to that point? You've been in this field for many years, you've been in leadership positions, you're now on the foundation board helping taking that further through the organization. So I want to know about your career, but then also the role that AECT has played.
Okay, I'll give you the 50-cent version maybe, and I can encapsulate some of that. I was born in Toronto, and at the age of 6 they packed me off on a train, a Grand Trunk Railway, and it was a steam train between Toronto and Chicago. And they dumped me off at the other end, and the black car picked me up, and I went to this orphanage called Mooseheart, and stayed there 11 years. And I say this not because it was, oh, poor me, because all of a sudden I had 500 brothers and sisters instead of just me. But they had a motto that was, and still is, inscribed on the front entrance to the school, was enter to learn, leave to serve. And I guess they did a pretty good job of indoctrinating that into me, because ever since then, I've taken it to heart. That was my role. I was not a great athlete. I was not a great academic. My God, no. I mean, I'm purely an average student. Never tipping the upper scales of the grade sheets. But so I thought, well, what can I do? And so I found a lot of things to do. I was in the military for 4 years in Alaska and elsewhere, and I went to Brockport State University and got my BA, or BS rather, in elementary ed, and then to Syracuse for master's. And there I was fortunate in two things. Actually, at Brockport I worked with Sherm Swartout and Melvin Smagorinsky. Melvin was formerly from Michigan State, and Sherwin was a former leader of AECT. And then I ended up at Syracuse, and lo and behold, there I met my mentor of all mentors to me, and that was Don Ely. And Don, in his characteristic way, basically indoctrinated me into the additional feeling of caring for students. He cared beyond belief. In 1962, as his student, I, with Herb McCoy, drove Route 5 and 20 on the highways in February between Syracuse and Kansas City, Missouri. That was the first AECT convention. It was DAVI then, Department of Audiovisual Instruction. And at that time, we lived on pemmican and dried apricots, and we stayed at the YMCA, but we learned the dance of the hospitality suite and learned it pretty well. So our survival depended on the good graces of many of the film companies at the time. Well, that was a start. And the thing that was interesting about that meeting was that Don took me literally by the hand and introduced me to Jim Finn, to Charlie Schuler, to Harkleroad, Lewis, Kemp, and the big names of the field in that day, and Bob DeKeefer. And subsequently, at every other convention or conference of DAVI and AECT, and I've only missed 2 since that day, because I was in Australia on leave, but those days were very, very caring, because they would then, these guys would take me aside, and Jim Finn would sit me down and say, "Dick, sit down." "Yes, sir." "What are you doing?" And I'd tell him. "Why aren't you in a doctoral program?" "Yes, sir." And so on and so forth. Well, and that was the kind of the flack I would get from Finn and from DeKeefer, and Charlie Schuler was much more caring and friendly. He would say, "Dick, I feel that you're going to do well," and so forth. Well, and that was the beginnings, and so I kind of got so involved with what this was, because I learned from the masters. I learned about the students, not about me. I learned how to help a student and why I should help it, that was my destiny. I couldn't do a lot of the other things. I didn't have the great research background and so forth. But so my way of looking at life was explainer. Look at the research. Look at the research by whomever it might be, Morrison, Jonason, Kemp, Ely, Regaluth, and so forth, and try to explain to the students, what does it all mean? And how do we use what they're doing? And so that has always been my role, explainer. And sometimes I don't explain it too well, but I have fun doing it. And in doing that, I have been fortunate that when I was with AECT temporarily, they sent me off, packed me off to Africa for a summer to do some filming for them, and that being my first real foreign adventure was that was a taste of what was to come, because from that place forward, all of a sudden, a passport became my best friend. And it would begin to itch periodically, and I would scratch it and say, well, I've got to do something, and so off I'd go. And I've covered places like going from Amsterdam to Berlin through East Germany when the wall was very much apparent, and the Vopos would come and knock on your door every 30 seconds and say, "Passport, passport." I had a stint as a NASA summer scholar. It actually lasted a year and a half. It was a long summer, working at Kennedy Space Center, and in that way I got involved with managing or measuring discretionary time and long-duration space flight. Because I thought, well, what do I know about science? But I did know about being alone and having time on your hands and what to do with it. And I extrapolated from that to say, well, here, these astronauts are going to be, 532 days one way between here and Mars. What are they going to do all that time? And so Eastern Airlines caught wind of what the research I was doing, and I had been fortunate with my contacts. I had met Jean-Leib Chrétien, who was he was the French cosmonaut, had gone up with the Russians, and he gave me a call and he said, "Why don't you come to Budapest?" I said, "Oh, sure, big deal. How am I going to get there?" He said, "You come and I'll tell you what's going to happen." So I went there, and it was the International Astronautical Congress, and there I met Svetlana, and I met all of the Russian cosmonauts of the day. And that was a thrill. So with all of that, then, I began to share this with the students and say, look what happened. Here, look at these guys, and so forth. And I would go to these conferences and bring back stuff and share that with them and see what the students did with it. And as we developed the program, for over 25 years it took to do the instructional systems program at UCF, the thing became apparent too that these students need to broaden their base. Students from Florida had never left the state. Most of them never had a passport, and I said, well, we're going to do something about that. So I started hauling in kids from Asia. I hauled them in from Taiwan and China and put them in my house, several of them. I wish I had $1 for every time I bought cars for them and everything. They didn't have any money, and I didn't either, but I'd get a wreck out of a car, and at least it ran and it was air conditioned, had a radio, say, here, drive that, go back and forth to school. And so kids have been in my home as well my life ever since. And that's because somehow that there is something about working with these students. The international students are in particular the ones that I perhaps give the most attention to, probably more than I should, my poor old American students, but they survive. But because English not being their language of instruction, it has posed serious problems, and ones that I joyfully reach out to see if we can't do something about. So that's it's a long way around the thing. By the way, I ran for president of AECT, not once, not twice, not 3 times, 4 times. I got my butt beat all those times, but you don't really, because when you run, you find all of a sudden that you've got just hundreds and hundreds of friends who wish you well, and so my debt to them, to all of these people, has been to try to serve AECT in whatever way I can, and now being on the foundation allows me to do that as well. But so it's all about, not me, but about the students. Why I'm doing anything is because of that. And I've got 2 wonderful sons, and I got 5 grandbabies. So they keep me occupied. Some are in New York and others in California. But my other sons and daughters are located now in Chengdu. They're located in Taipei, Kaohsiung, Tamshui, Xi'an, Shanghai, you name it. That's where my other kids are. And I can't wait I'll be going in December again to visit some of them, both in Taipei and in Beijing. So with that, I guess I've pretty well covered the waterfront of not so much who I am, but what drives me the way it is.
I know you've had an incredible impact on this organization, but also with the international division, and to see you as the godfather of all these students. I never see you at a conference where you don't have your gaggle of students following you around. I think that's absolutely wonderful. But I do, in a final, we have just a few minutes here, but in a final question, I know you're instrumental in doing this history project. And I would like you to share your vision of why you think this is so important and so critical for us to be doing this at this time.
It's simply put, the students. Why I'm doing this is, there's no other reason. When I teach, I have taught these students for 25, 30 years now, 35. And I talk about Don Ely, I talk about Charlie Schuler and Jerry Kemp and all of these folks, Jim Finn, and nowhere had I been able to share with them in up close and personal view of who these people are. People like old Charlie White, that old rascal, every once he invades my space, and I say, oh God, what am I going to do with you, Charlie? But he's a good buddy, and he keeps me grounded too, when a former AECT president. But the thing that has held the glue together has been, if we can provide history makers, and I don't refer to myself, I'm too young to be a history maker. But if we can provide the students with glimpses of some of these people, then their works, their textbooks, their theories come alive. And that's what it's all about. You make it a living theory, then they begin to know what to do with it.